Yesterday, we asked why the ark was never meant to be touched. We saw the command in the wilderness. We saw the warning. They must not touch the holy things lest they die. We saw the consequence at the threshing floor. But that was not the first time fear surrounded the ark. There was a day when an entire city stopped celebrating. A day when rejoicing turned into mourning. A day when the people asked a question that still echoes through Scripture. Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? Why did Israel fear the presence of God? Why did the ark bring shouting in one moment and silence in the next? Why did idols fall before it? Why did foreign cities tremble? Why did David himself become afraid? Was the fear irrational, or was it recognition? Before we answer, we must walk through every movement of the ark, because the fear of that day did not begin suddenly. It was built step by step. The fear that later surrounded the ark did not emerge from a single moment. It developed across time, across geography, and across repeated encounters with the same reality. The presence of the Lord among his people. In the wilderness, before Israel entered the land, the Lord defined how the ark was to be approached. Numbers 4 does not begin with emotion. It begins with instruction. When the camp was to move, Aaron and his sons were commanded to enter and cover the Ark of the Testimony. The veil was to be placed over it. A covering of durable leather was to be laid above that. A cloth, wholly of blue, was to cover it completely. Only then were the poles inserted. The sons of Kohath were permitted to carry the holy things after this preparation, yet they were warned not to touch them, lest they die. They were warned not even to look upon the holy things uncovered, lest they die. The boundary was established long before it was tested. Years later, in 1 Samuel 4, Israel faced the Philistines in battle. After suffering defeat, the elders asked why the Lord had allowed it. Their solution was immediate. Bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh into the camp, that it may save them from their enemies. The ark arrived amid shouting so loud that the earth resounded. The Philistines heard and feared, recognizing that the ark represented the God who had struck Egypt with plagues in the wilderness. Yet the outcome was not victory. Israel was defeated again. 30,000 foot soldiers fell. The ark was captured. The sons of Eli died on that same day. The text does not diminish the ark's holiness in captivity. Instead, 1 Samuel 5 reveals that the ark carried the presence of the Lord even into Philistine territory. Placed in the temple of Dagon, the idol fell face down before it. When restored, it fell again, broken. The hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod. Affliction spread to Gath and Ekron. The ark moved, and fear followed. The Philistines did not celebrate its presence. They sought relief from it. In 1 Samuel 6, they constructed a new cart and placed the ark upon it along with a guilt offering. The cows pulling the cart went straight toward Israelite territory without turning aside. The ark arrived at Beth-shemesh. The people rejoiced when they saw it. Yet the narrative records another shift. Some of the men of Beth-shemesh looked into the ark. The Lord struck them. The number of those struck is recorded. The people mourned, and they asked, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God?" That question marks a turning point. It is not asked in ignorance of what happened. It is asked in response to what they witnessed. The ark did not merely symbolize presence, it demonstrated holiness. Years later, in 2 Samuel 6, David gathered 30,000 chosen men to bring the ark from the house of Abinadab. The ark was again placed on a new cart. Uzzah and Ahio guided it. David and all Israel celebrated before the Lord with instruments and dancing. At the threshing floor of Dagon, the oxen stumbled. Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. The anger of the Lord was kindled against him. He died beside the ark. David became afraid of the Lord that day. The procession stopped. Across these chapters, the ark is associated with celebration, power, collapse of idols, military defeat, affliction, blessing, and death. Yet through every movement, one thread remains constant. The ark belongs to the Lord, and its holiness is not diminished by familiarity. The fear that emerged in Israel did not come from superstition. It followed encounter. The warning in Numbers 4 was given in advance. The narratives in Samuel record what happened when the boundaries surrounding the ark were crossed. The people of Beth-shemesh asked who could stand before the Lord. David himself became afraid of the Lord that day. The pattern reveals that the presence of God was never presented as casual. To understand the day Israel feared the presence of God, we must trace how instruction became experience and how experience led to recognition. Because the fear recorded in Scripture was not random, it was revealed and it was remembered. To understand the day Israel feared the presence of God, the historical movement of the ark must be traced carefully within the text itself. Numbers 4 situates the ark within the wilderness structure of Israel's worship. The tabernacle stood at the center of the camp, and the Lord established specific roles for the sons of Levi. Among them, the sons of Kohath were assigned to carry the most holy things, yet their role was limited by restriction. Aaron and his sons alone were to enter first and cover the ark. Only after the ark was concealed were the Kohathites permitted to approach and carry it by poles. They were forbidden to touch it. They were forbidden even to look upon it uncovered. The ark's holiness, therefore, was embedded in Israel's liturgical structure. It was not merely a symbol of divine presence. It was regulated by command. By the time we arrive in 1 Samuel 4, the historical setting has shifted to the period of the Judges. Israel is fragmented politically and spiritually unstable. The ark resides at Shiloh. The sons of Eli serve as priests. When Israel suffers defeat in battle against the Philistines, the elders decide to bring the ark into the camp, believing that its presence will secure victory. The text does not record that the Lord commanded this movement. It records the decision of the elders. The ark is brought, and the camp erupts with shouting. The Philistines recognize the significance of the ark and fear, yet the battle results in greater defeat. The ark is captured. This moment is historically significant. The ark leaves Israelite territory and enters Philistine cities. Yet the text does not describe a loss of holiness. Instead, 1 Samuel 5 records that when the ark is placed in the temple of Dagon, the idol falls before it. The hand of the Lord is heavy against the Philistines. Tumors afflict the people of Ashdod. The ark is transferred to Gath, then to Ekron, and in each location affliction follows. Fear spreads among the Philistines. The ark's presence proves active beyond Israel's borders. In 1 Samuel 6, the Philistines resolve to return the ark. They construct a new cart and place the ark upon it, accompanied by offerings. The cows pulling the cart proceed directly toward Beth-shemesh. The ark returns to Israelite soil. At Beth-shemesh, the people rejoice. Yet when some look into the ark, the Lord strikes them. The number of those struck is recorded. The people mourn and ask who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God. The ark is then sent to Kiriath-Jearim, where it remains for years. The historical ark continues into the reign of David in 2 Samuel 6. Israel now has a king. Jerusalem has been established as the political center. David seeks to bring the ark into the city. The ark, which had resided in the house of Abinadab, is placed on a new cart. The setting shifts from rural town to royal procession. The celebration is intense. David and all Israel rejoice before the Lord with instruments and dancing. Yet when Uzzah touches the ark after the oxen stumble, he dies. David becomes afraid of the Lord that day. The ark remains in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months, and the Lord blesses that household. Across these historical transitions, wilderness camp, tribal confederation, Philistine territory, rural towns, and monarchy, the ark retains the same association. It belongs to the Lord and carries his presence. The political context changes, the leadership changes, the geography changes, but the textual portrayal of the ark's holiness does not shift. The fear expressed at Beth-shemesh and the fear that grips David do not arise in isolation. They arise within a history of repeated encounters with the same reality. The ark's presence has brought both victory and defeat, blessing and judgment. The question asked in 1 Samuel 6, who can stand before the Lord, does not vanish in 2 Samuel 6. It reappears implicitly when David becomes afraid. The narrative suggests that fear is not disconnected from earlier events, it is cumulative. The ark's movement through history is not random. It follows a trajectory marked by command, encounter, and consequence. The command in Numbers established the boundary. The events in Samuel reveal how that boundary was experienced across generations. Understanding this continuity is essential for grasping the full weight of the day Israel feared the presence of God. Because that fear did not emerge from a single isolated act. It emerged from history. And history in these chapters is consistent. The weight of Israel's fear cannot be understood without examining the precise wording of the text. In Numbers 4, the ark is not introduced as an abstract theological concept. It is described within procedural instruction. When the camp sets out, Aaron and his sons must first enter the sanctuary and cover the ark of the testimony with the veil. Over that veil, they must place a covering of durable leather. Over that, a cloth wholly of blue. Then the poles are inserted. Only after these steps are completed may the sons of Kohath approach to carry the ark. The instruction immediately adds a restriction. They must not touch the holy things, lest they die. The text also warns that they must not go in to see the holy things even for a moment, lest they die. The repetition of the consequence establishes seriousness. The boundary is explicit. When we turn to 1 Samuel 4, the ark is brought into Israel's camp during battle. The text records that the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim, came into the camp. The description connects the ark to divine presence. The people shout with a great shout so that the earth resounds. The Philistines hear and say that a god has come into the camp, yet the battle results in defeat. The ark is captured. The text does not explain this through loss of holiness. It presents the capture as historical fact. In 1 Samuel 5, the ark is placed in the house of Dagon. The narrative emphasizes physical detail. Dagon falls face down before the ark. He is set back in place. The next morning, he has fallen again, with head and hands cut off. The threshold remains. The text also states that the hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and tumors broke out among them. The ark is transferred to Gath, then to Ekron, and in each city affliction follows. The repetition underscores continuity. The ark's presence produces tangible effects. In 1 Samuel 6, the Philistines prepare a new cart and place the ark upon it along with a guilt offering. The cows pulling the cart go straight toward Beth-shemesh. The text records that they did not turn aside to the right or to the left. The ark arrives in Israelite territory. The people of Beth-shemesh rejoice when they see the ark. They split the wood of the cart and offer the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. Yet the narrative then states that the Lord struck some of the men of Beth-shemesh because they looked into the ark. The number of those struck is recorded. The people mourn and say, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall he go up away from us?" The question is significant. It acknowledges holiness and expresses fear. The ark is then sent to Kiriath Jearim. In 2 Samuel 6, David gathers 30,000 chosen men to bring up the ark from the house of Abinadab. The ark is placed on a new cart. Uzzah and Ahio guide it. David and all Israel celebrate before the Lord with various instruments. The list of instruments highlights intensity and joy. At the threshing floor of Dagon, the oxen stumble. The ark shifts. Uzzah reaches out his hand to the ark of God and takes hold of it because the oxen nearly upset it. The text provides the reason for his action. The next statement is decisive. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died beside the ark of God. The narrative then records David's reaction. He was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. He called the place Perez Uzzah. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" The language of fear echoes the earlier question in 1 Samuel 6. At Beth-shemesh, the people asked who could stand before the Lord. In 2 Samuel 6, David asks how the ark can come to him. The repetition of fear following contact or exposure aligns with the earlier prohibition in Numbers 4. The text does not state that the command had been revoked. It does not introduce a new warning at the moment of judgment. The prohibition already existed. Another detail appears later in 2 Samuel 6. After 3 months in the house of Obed-Edom, the ark is brought up again. This time, the text states that those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps and sacrifices were offered. The wording emphasizes carrying rather than cart movement. The shift in language suggests attention to proper handling. Across these passages, several elements repeat: divine presence, movement, boundary, violation, consequence, fear, and sometimes blessing. The ark is consistently described in connection with the Lord. The prohibition against touch and exposure is explicitly recorded in Numbers 4. The deaths in 1 Samuel 6 and 2 Samuel 6 follow exposure and contact. The text does not portray the ark as unstable or defenseless. It does not suggest that human intervention was required for its preservation. The narrative focus remains on the boundary. The detailed reading of these chapters reveals a pattern. The command establishes the boundary. The narrative records what happens when that boundary is crossed. The fear expressed by the people arises not from ignorance, but from encounter. The day Israel feared the presence of God was not isolated from prior instruction. It unfolded within a framework already revealed. And that framework defines the weight of the moment. The biblical texts provide both instructions and events, and the safest interpretation is the one that remains anchored to what those texts explicitly establish. What the text states clearly is this: in Numbers 4, the ark is treated as most holy, and the Lord defines strict handling procedures. It must be covered by Aaron and his sons before being carried. The carriers must not touch the holy things, lest they die. They must not look upon the holy things uncovered, lest they die. In 1 Samuel 6, the text records that some of the men of Beth-shemesh looked into the ark, and the Lord struck them. The people mourn and ask, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God?" Their question identifies the event as a confrontation with holiness. In 2 Samuel 6, the text records that Uzzah touched the ark because the oxen stumbled, and the ark nearly upset. The anger of the Lord was kindled against him, and God struck him down because of his error. David becomes afraid of the Lord and asks, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" The narrative thus presents fear as a direct response to what occurred in the ark's presence. Given these explicit statements, one possible analysis is that Israel's fear was not irrational, but a recognition shaped by continuity between command and consequence. Numbers 4 warns of death for prohibited touch and prohibited exposure. The narratives in Samuel record death following touch and exposure. The text itself therefore supports the interpretation that the fear at Beth-shemesh and the fear in David were responses to the reality that the Lord's holiness was not symbolic alone, but regulated by revealed boundary. Another possible analysis concerns how the ark is treated by different groups in the narrative. In 1 Samuel 4, Israel brings the ark into the camp with the expectation that it will save them. The text records their reasoning, but does not state that the Lord commanded this act. The result is defeat and capture. In 1 Samuel 5, the Philistines place the ark in the temple of Dagon, and the idol falls. Affliction spreads. The Philistines respond with fear and seek to remove the ark from their cities. In 1 Samuel 6, the people of Beth-shemesh rejoice at the ark's return. Yet some look into it and are struck. Their rejoicing becomes mourning, their closeness becomes fear. In 2 Samuel 6, the national celebration of David becomes fear after Uzzah's death. Across these scenes, the ark is never neutral. It generates response, and that response shifts depending on how it is approached. It is also possible to observe, strictly from the text, that fear in these narratives functions as a turning point. At Beth-shemesh, fear leads to the question of who can stand before the Lord and to the decision to send the ark away. In 2 Samuel 6, fear leads David to stop the procession and keep the ark from Jerusalem for a period. The fear is not portrayed as mere emotion, it influences action. The text also encourages a possible analysis of the relationship between holiness and distance. Numbers 4 establishes that distance is commanded. The ark is covered, carried by poles, and shielded from sight. The narratives in Samuel present moments where distance collapses through looking into the ark or touching it, and the outcome is death. Within the limits of the text, it is reasonable to interpret that fear arises when distance collapses and holiness is encountered without the protection of the revealed boundary. Another possible analysis concerns the distinction between intention and obedience. The text in 2 Samuel 6 explicitly provides Uzzah's immediate reason. The oxen stumbled and the ark nearly upset. Yet the narrative still identifies his act as error and records death as the outcome. Numbers 4 does not qualify its prohibition by circumstance. The boundary is defined without exceptions in the wording presented. Therefore, the text supports the analysis that good intention does not remove the seriousness of crossing a commanded boundary. It is important, however, to state what the texts do not provide. They do not offer an extended theological explanation in the form of commentary. They do not explicitly explain why the ark's holiness demanded restriction beyond the fact that the Lord commanded it and attached consequence to it. They do not describe internal motives for the men of Beth-shemesh beyond their action of looking. They do not provide Uzzah's internal reasoning beyond the practical concern recorded. Therefore, any interpretation that claims certainty about hidden motives would exceed what is written. Within the limits of these chapters, the most grounded conclusion is that Israel's fear was shaped by repeated evidence that the Lord's presence is not approached casually. The command in Numbers 4 provides the legal and covenantal foundation. The events in Samuel provide narrative confirmation through consequence. The fear that appears in Beth-shemesh and in David is thus not superstition, but recognition that holiness is defined by command and upheld by outcome. This prepares the reader for the broader implication that the presence of God in these texts brings both blessing and accountability, and that fear functions as a response to encountering holiness where boundaries have been crossed. When the command in Numbers and the events in Samuel are placed side by side, the implications arise from repetition rather than from speculation. Numbers 4 establishes that the ark is most holy and that its holiness requires distance, covering, and mediation. The command does not leave room for improvisation. The ark is not to be touched. It is not to be seen uncovered. The consequence attached to these prohibitions is death. The instruction is embedded in the covenantal structure of Israel's worship. In 1 Samuel 4-5, the ark moves beyond the boundaries of the tabernacle into battle and foreign territory. Yet the text demonstrates that its holiness does not diminish. The ark does not lose its association with the Lord when captured. Instead, it becomes the focal point of divine action among the Philistines. Idols fall, affliction spreads, fear follows. The ark is not passive, it remains connected to the Lord's active presence. In 1 Samuel 6, when the ark returns to Israel, the people of Beth-shemesh rejoice. Yet when some look into the ark, the Lord strikes them. The text connects the event directly to holiness through the question that follows: who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? The fear expressed is not abstract. It emerges in response to experience. In 2 Samuel 6, the celebration of David becomes fear when Uzzah touches the ark. The text does not restate the wilderness command, yet that command remains part of Israel's revealed instruction. The narrative identifies Uzzah's action as error and records death as the consequence. David becomes afraid and questions how the ark can come to him. Across these passages, the ark consistently evokes reaction. Sometimes the reaction is celebration, sometimes it is fear, sometimes it is mourning, sometimes it is blessing. The difference in outcome corresponds to the manner in which the ark is approached in relation to the revealed boundary. One implication that emerges from the text is that holiness, as presented here, is not defined by human perception, but by divine designation. The ark is holy because the Lord has declared it so and has attached commands to it. The boundaries surrounding it are not constructed by the people. They are given by the Lord. Another implication concerns consistency. The command in Numbers precedes the events in Samuel. The consequences in Samuel align with that command. The text does not portray a change in divine standard between wilderness and monarchy. The holiness described in Numbers remains operative in the days of the judges and in the reign of David. The fear recorded at Beth-shemesh and in David is therefore cumulative. It is not triggered by a single unpredictable act. It develops through repeated encounters with the same reality. The Lord's presence cannot be handled outside the terms he has set. The narratives also reveal that holiness produces both blessing and judgment. In 2 Samuel 6, the ark remains in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months, and the Lord blesses his household. The same presence that brought death at the threshing floor brings blessing in a different setting. The text does not attribute this difference to a change in the ark. It suggests that the manner of approach and the context of obedience matter. The question asked at Beth-shemesh, who is able to stand before the Lord, echoes beyond that town. It reflects an awareness that standing before holiness is not trivial. The fear that arises is not portrayed as rebellion, but as recognition of divine weight. Another implication, grounded in the text, concerns the relationship between familiarity and reverence. In 1 Samuel 4, Israel brings the ark into battle expecting deliverance. In 2 Samuel 6, David celebrates before it with great intensity. Yet in both cases, familiarity with the ark does not negate the boundary defined in the law. The narratives show that proximity does not eliminate holiness. The ark's design itself reinforces this implication. Numbers 4 describes coverings and poles that prevent direct contact. The structure communicates separation. When that separation collapses, through exposure at Beth-shemesh or through touch at the threshing floor, the outcome corresponds to the earlier warning. Within the limits of these texts, the day Israel feared the presence of God was not merely a day of shock. It was a day of recognition that the Lord's holiness is consistent, active, and governed by his own command. That recognition shapes what follows. Because fear in these chapters does not end the narrative, it redirects it. And that redirection prepares us for the final movement of this episode and the transition to what comes next. The fear that surrounded the ark was not born in a single moment of shock. It unfolded through a pattern already revealed in the law and confirmed in history. In the wilderness, the Lord defined the boundary. The ark was covered. It was concealed. It was carried by poles. The command was unmistakable. Do not touch the holy things, lest you die. Do not look upon them uncovered, lest you die. Years later, the ark entered battle. It entered foreign temples. It returned to Israel. It stood in fields, in towns, and in royal processions. Yet the holiness defined in numbers did not diminish with time. At Beth-shemesh, when some looked into the ark, death followed. The people asked, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God?" That question marked a turning point. Celebration became mourning. Curiosity became fear. At the threshing floor of Dagon, when Uzzah touched the ark, death followed again. David became afraid and asked, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" The fear expressed there echoed the earlier question. Across these chapters, the ark does not change. The Lord does not revise his command. The boundary remains consistent. What changes is Israel's recognition of what that boundary means. The day Israel feared the presence of God was not simply a day of punishment. It was a day when holiness was encountered without illusion. It was a day when the people understood that the presence of the Lord cannot be treated as ordinary, manipulated for advantage, or approached without regard for what has already been spoken. The ark brought victory in some moments. It brought judgment in others. It brought blessing in the house of Obed-Edom. It brought fear to Beth-shemesh. But in every scene, it revealed the same truth. The Lord's presence carries weight, and that weight demands response. The question remains before us, as it remained before them. Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? In our next episode, we move from the question of fear to the deeper examination of what that fear reveals. We will return to the scene at Beth-shemesh. We will examine the moment when Israel realized that holiness is not merely a theological word, but a reality that shapes how one stands, approaches, and responds. The next episode will confront a theme that rises naturally from everything we have seen. What does God's holiness demand? If the ark could not be touched, if it could not be looked upon uncovered, if even celebration did not suspend the boundary, then what does that reveal about approaching the presence of God? If this study has helped you trace the continuity between command and consequence, continue the journey. The narrative is building, and each episode deepens the weight of what Scripture reveals. Subscribe and stay with the series, because the story of the Ark is not merely about ancient ritual, it is about presence, and presence in these texts is never casual. The next episode will take us further into that reality. Do not miss it.